I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into my late uncle's old mansion because the air felt heavy, like the walls themselves were whispering secrets. But I never expected my cousins to burst into laughter the second they saw me standing in the doorway, holding that invitation to the will, reading with shaking hands, and pretending I didn't hear one of them say, "Why is she even here?" She was barely family. I wanted to leave right then, but something inside me told me I needed to stay. That today would change everything, even if I wasn't ready for it. The room was dim, lit only by the dusty chandelier above us, and the long wooden table was already crowded with relatives who had spent years avoiding me, treating me like an outsider ever since my mother died and my uncle took me in for a short time when I was 10. I swallowed the tightness in my throat and walked toward the only empty chair, trying not to flinch when my cousin Mark muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "She probably thinks she's getting something valuable. How cute." His sister Talia pretended to cough just to hide her giggle, and the others stared at me with that same mocking pity they always used. I sat down silently, feeling their eyes burn into my back. But I kept reminding myself I had every right to be there. Uncle Raymond had sent me the letter himself before he passed. And even if I didn't understand why, I knew he wouldn't have done it without a reason. The lawyer, an older man with sharp glasses and a calm but unreadable expression, cleared his throat and shuffled a stack of papers. The room gradually fell quiet except for the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall. "We're here to honor Mr. Raymond Ellis's final wishes," the lawyer began. But before he could continue, Mark cut in with a smug grin. "Let's just get to the part where we find out what we inherited." The lawyer raised a brow, unfazed, and replied, "We'll get there soon enough. But first, there's something important Mr. Ellis wanted to address. Something regarding his niece." My heart jumped against my ribs. Niece, me. The cousins exchanged glances, smirks fading slightly as confusion replaced confidence. The lawyer slowly lifted his eyes from the paper and looked directly at Miss Study, focused, almost heavy, before saying, "He wanted this reading to begin with her." The moment the lawyer said those words, the room shifted, like everyone had suddenly forgotten how to breathe, and I felt every pair of eyes crash onto me with a force that made my pulse race. But I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap so they wouldn't see them tremble. Mark leaned forward, his voice thick with irritation as he hissed, "Why her? She barely even knew him anymore." The lawyer didn't even look his way as he lifted another sheet from the folder and said, "Mr. Ellis instructed that before the reading of the will begins, his niece must hear a private message he left specifically for her." My throat tightened, and for a moment I wondered if this was all a mistake. If maybe Uncle Raymond had meant another niece, maybe someone they liked. Someone they welcomed at Christmas dinners and family trips, ones I never got invited to. But then the lawyer pressed a small button on a device, and a faint crackle filled the room before my uncle's tired but warm voice drifted out. "If you're hearing this," he said, "then I want you to know something I should have told you years ago." The cousins froze. Even their breathing went quiet. "You were never forgotten," the recording continued, "and you were never unwanted. I owe you an explanation, and I hope this message will help you understand." I felt a sting behind my eyes because no one in that house had ever spoken to me with that kind of tenderness. My uncle's voice wavered slightly. "The truth is, I kept something hidden from the rest of the family, something only you deserve to know. After your mother passed, I promised her I would protect you. But I failed that promise when I let others push you away." My chest tightened as memories flashed by being ignored at gatherings, being treated like a burden, hearing whispered conversations I wasn't meant to hear. "You grew up thinking you were alone," the message said. "But you weren't. I was watching you, proud of you, even when distance made it look otherwise." Mark scoffed and rolled his eyes, but the sound felt forced, nervous even. Talia shifted uncomfortably beside him. The lawyer stopped the recording and looked at me again. "There is more," he said quietly, but Mr. Ellis requested that the rest be revealed at a specific moment during the reading. I could feel the tension twisting around the table like a tightening rope. And for the first time in my life, my cousins didn't look amused, they looked afraid. The lawyer placed the recorder aside and adjusted his glasses, and I could feel the atmosphere thicken as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. And for a second, I wondered if the house had ever been this silent, even when my uncle was alive. "We will now begin the reading," he announced, lifting the first page of the will. But the cousins were no longer relaxed, no longer smirking. Instead, they sat stiffly, eyes flicking between me and the lawyer as though suddenly uncertain of the ground beneath their feet. "To my nieces and nephews," the lawyer read aloud, "I leave a series of personal items and letters, each chosen with care." Mark let out an impatient sigh. "Personal items?" He had a whole estate. "Why are we wasting time?" he complained, but the lawyer continued without acknowledging him. "To Mark Ellis, I leave my antique fishing set, since he always insisted he knew more about the outdoors than I did." A few people snickered. Mark's face turned red. "To Talia Ellis, I leave my collection of first edition novels, in hope she'll one day read at least one of them." Talia's jaw dropped, and a tiny wave of laughter rippled through the room. It was the first time I had ever seen any of them uncomfortable, and I tried not to let myself enjoy it, even though part of me did. Then the lawyer paused, looked at the next line, and his eyes softened before he said, "And to my niece?" He stopped again, glancing at me. My hands tightened in my lap. "To her," he continued slowly, "I leave something that cannot be listed yet, as it comes with an explanation she must hear before the inheritance is disclosed." Mark immediately shot up. "What does that mean? Why can't we hear it now?" he snapped. Talia grabbed his arm, whispering urgently for him to sit down, but he pulled away. The lawyer finally looked directly at him, voice firm but steady. "Because your uncle made it extremely clear that this part of the will concerns her and her alone." A chill ran through me. Everyone's stares felt sharp as knives. "We will resume after a short break," the lawyer added, closing the folder with deliberate calm. But as he stood, he leaned slightly toward me and said in a low tone, "Don't be afraid. Your uncle wanted justice." My heart pounded. Justice, the word echoed, heavy and urgent. And for the first time, I felt the faintest hint of what might be coming, something my cousins definitely didn't want revealed. When the lawyer announced the break, the room erupted into low whispers and tense movements, chairs scraping as people stood up. But I stayed seated because my legs felt too shaky to trust. And honestly, I didn't want to give my cousins the satisfaction of seeing me retreat. Mark stormed toward the far corner of the room with Talia chasing after him, her voice sharp and hushed as she scolded him for losing his temper, while the rest of the family hovered in clumps, pretending to talk about neutral things, but clearly stealing glances at me as if I were some kind of ticking bomb. I kept my eyes down, tracing the grain patterns in the wooden table, trying to steady my breathing, until suddenly a shadow fell across me, and I looked up to see Aunt Millie and me, Uncle's older sister, the one who never acknowledged me except when she needed someone to blame, standing right in front of me with her arms crossed tightly. "Don't get comfortable," she whispered, her voice dripping with cold bitterness. Raymond always had a soft spot for strays. The word jabbed at me, cruel and familiar, but before I could respond, the lawyer re-entered the room, signaling the break was over. Everyone scrambled back to their seats. The air felt heavier than before, thick with suspicion and dread. The lawyer reopened the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope with my name handwritten on it in my uncle's careful script. the sight of which made my chest squeeze painfully because it was proof real. Undeniable proof that I mattered to him more than anyone here wanted to believe. This letter, the lawyer said, contains information that must be heard aloud, as per Mr. Ellis's instruction. Mark groaned dramatically, but no one dared interrupt this time. The lawyer carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning it quickly before he began reading it for all to hear. "My dear girl," he read, and the room froze instantly at the tenderness of the greeting. "If you are hearing this, then I have finally gathered the courage to reveal what I should have told you long ago." My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. "You are not just my niece," the letter continued. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Even a gasp. "You are the rightful heir to something the rest of the family believes belonged to them." The cousins stiffened. Aunt Lillian's face drained of color. "The truth," the letter said, "will explain everything." The lawyer's voice trembled ever so slightly as he continued reading, and every breath in the room seemed to vanish at once, as though the house itself had paused to listen. "Years ago," the letter said, "a betrayal took place in this family, and that cost your mother everything and forced me to make choices I have regretted every day since." My pulse pounded in my ears, and I could feel Mark and Talia staring at me, their earlier arrogance dissolving into something tighter, sharper fear. The letter went on. "Your mother and I built this estate together, long before these walls were filled with people who cared more about what they could take than what they could give. But when she fell ill, certain family members convinced me that you would be better off elsewhere, away from the inheritance that was rightfully tied to her share. I was weak. I listened, and you suffered for it." My throat closed, and for a moment I could barely swallow the rising ache in my chest. "The ones who persuaded me," the letter continued, "were motivated by greed, and after your mother passed, they quietly divided her portion among themselves, making sure you received nothing." Gasps erupted around the table, some shocked, some guilty, some pretending to be surprised, even though deep down they knew exactly what had been done. Aunt Lillian gripped the edge of her chair, knuckles turning white, her lips pressed so tightly together they nearly disappeared. "I should have fought harder for you," the letter said, "but I am fighting now, even if only through these final words. The estate they stole from you, the land, the investments, the assets they pretended were theirs, I have spent years reclaiming every piece of it behind their backs." Murmurs broke out, panicked and sharp. Mark nearly jumped out of his seat. "What is this? What is he talking about?" He shouted, but no one, not even Talia, dared validate him. The lawyer held up a hand, firm and unmoving, and continued reading. "Everything your mother built, everything she intended for you, has been restored, and it belongs to you alone." My breath caught. I stared at the table, unable to lift my eyes, terrified and exhilarated all at once. "Do not let them intimidate you," the letter finished. "You are stronger than all their schemes combined, and it is time the truth sets you free." When the lawyer lowered the page, the room felt like it was spinning, and for the first time ever, my cousins were the ones sitting in stunned, speechless silence. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on, and for a long moment no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire room had been frozen in place by the weight of what had just been revealed. But then Mark slammed his hand on the table so hard that several people jumped, his voice cracking with rage as he barked, "This is a lie. He wouldn't do Faith, wouldn't give everything to her." His words hit me like sparks from a fire, but the lawyer didn't flinch. He simply folded the letter with deliberate calm and said, "Every document, every correction, every transfer your uncle made over the last few years confirms exactly what he stated." Talia grabbed Mark's arm, her nails digging into his jacket as she whispered urgently, "Stop it. "You're making it worse," but he shook her off. His eyes red with anger as he glared at me, like I had personally stolen something from him instead of reclaiming what had been taken from me long before. I was old enough to understand. Aunt Lillian finally spoke, her voice brittle and shaking. Raymond was confused in his final years. "You can't take this seriously." He didn't know what he was doing. The lawyer lifted his gaze slowly, his expression steely. "Your brother began these changes nearly a decade ago, long before any illness. He was fully lucid and intentional every step of the way." A murmur of shock rippled through the remaining relatives. I sat frozen, my heart racing, unable to decide whether to cry, speak, or disappear into the floor. The lawyer reached into the folder again and pulled out another set of documents. "This," he said, tapping the stack, "is the official transfer of the reclaimed properties, accounts, and assets. All of them are listed under her name." Mark shot to his feet again. "You can't do this. This is our legacy," he shouted, his face nearly purple. The lawyer gave him a long, unwavering stare. "No, it was never yours. It was her mother's, and it returns to her daughter now exactly as it should." The word struck the table like a gavel. My breath trembled in my chest as I finally lifted my eyes and looked around at faces that had spent years laughing at me, excluding me, treating me like I was nothingly. Now their expressions were twisted with disbelief, bitterness, and something that looked a lot like fear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the powerless one in the room. I wasn't the outsider anymore. Something had shifted, and everyone could feel it. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears. But beneath the fear was something something warm and rising. A strength I didn't recognize at first because I had spent so many years shrinking myself to survive these people. Yet now it pulls through me like a reminder that I belonged here just as much as they did, maybe more. The lawyer cleared his throat again, drawing everyone's attention back to him, and said, "There is still one final recording your uncle left," and he specified that it must be played only after the inheritance is announced. The room shifted again, a collective flinch of dread and curiosity. He pressed the button on the recorder, and after a moment of static, my uncle's voice returned gentler but firmer than before. "If they are listening," he said, "then I want them to hear the truth from my own mouth." Immediately, Aunt Lillian tensed, her eyes narrowing as though preparing to defend herself. "To those of you who convinced me to cut her out, who whispered lies into my grief and turned my sister's daughter into a burden in my eyes," he continued, "I know exactly what you did. I knew it even then." Talia sucked in a breath. Mark's jaw dropped open slightly. My uncle's voice grew heavier. "You stole from her. You manipulated me. You made decisions that were never yours to make. And instead of being honest with me when I confronted you years later, you pretended you had only been trying to protect the family." A few people shifted uncomfortably, some staring at their shoes. "But family does not steal," my uncle said. "Family does not lie to a child or toss her aside so they can claim a larger piece of a pie they never built." His words struck like stones. I felt something inside me crack open at pain this time, but a strange, dizzying relief. "That is why everything returns to her now," the recording went on. "Not because she is my niece, not because of blood, but because she is the only one among you who has ever shown kindness without expectation, loyalty without reward, and resilience without complaint." My eyes burned at the edges. She is the rightful heir not by birthright, but by heart. The recording clicked off, plunging the room back into that thick, suffocating silence. No one laughed now. No one rolled their eyes. For the first time in my life, they had no choice but to see me, really see me, and every emotion they once forced on mesmerism, shame, and significance seemed to weigh in the heat of something stronger, truth. As the last echo of my uncle's voice faded, the lawyer gently placed the recorder on the table, and I could feel the room shifting again, not with noise this time, but with the heavy, unmistakable weight of realization settling on every person who had once dismissed me like I was an afterthought. And suddenly the silence felt almost fragile, like touching it would cause the whole room to break apart. Aunt Lillian was the first to speak, though her voice shook with a thin layer of anger she was trying desperately to hide. "This isn't fair," she whispered, but her whisper broke halfway through. "We took care of him. We were here." The lawyer glanced at her with a calm, unflinching expression and replied, "You were here, yes. But presence does not equal loyalty, and your brother made that very clear." Mark scoffed loudly, crossing his arms like a defiant child. "So what now? She just gets everything and we get nothing?" The lawyer didn't look at him when he answered. "The personal items listed earlier are still yours. But the estate, the businesses, the properties tied to her mother's share, and the assets reclaimed those are exclusively hers." The words dropped like stones into the room. Talia leaned forward, her voice softer but trembling. "But why would he keep all this secret for so long?" she asked, and for the first time she sounded less mocking, more genuinely confused. I swallowed hard before speaking, my voice barely above a whisper. "Because none of you would have accepted it. You never accepted me." My words seemed to ripple through them, a truth too sharp to ignore. The lawyer turned back to the folder and pulled out one last envelope. "This is the final part of Mr. Ellis's instructions," he said. "It contains the immediate legal transfer authorization, as well as a personal message requested to be delivered directly to her." He handed the envelope to me. My fingers tingled as they brushed the paper. It felt heavier than it looked, as if everything I had ever been denied was somehow sealed inside. I hesitated before opening it, acutely aware that every eye in the room was fixed on me. As I unfolded the letter, a faint scent of my uncle's cologne drifted up, a detail so unexpected, so gentle that my throat tightened instantly. The first line read, "You endured more than any child should have to. Now it is time for you to stand." My vision blurred for a moment, tears threatening, but I forced myself to breathe because this was no longer a moment of pain. It was a moment of reclamation, of stepping into a truth that had always been mine, even when others tried to bury it. My hands trembled as I continued reading the letter, each sentence unfolding like a door unlocking inside me, revealing places I had closed off for years just to survive. And the room around me seemed to fade as my uncle's words pulled me in completely. "I know you grew up thinking you were unwanted," it read, "but you were only ever kept away because they feared what you represented, the truth they tried so hard to bury." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those years pressing against my chest, but also something lifting, like a shadow slowly peeling away. "This estate was never meant to reward selfishness," the letter went on. "It was meant to protect the legacy your mother and I built together. And you, my dear girl, are the only one who carries her kindness, her strength, and her integrity." The room blurred at the edges as I blinked rapidly, refusing to let tears fall while so many eyes were locked on me with a mix of guilt, shock, and resentment. "Do not let them make you small," the letter said. "They already stole too many years from you. Do not let them steal your courage too." My breath caught at that line, because courage was something I had never believed I possessed in it, really. Not when I spent half my childhood being shuttled between relatives who barely tolerated me. Not when I ate alone at family events. Not when I overheard whispered comments about how I should be grateful for anything at all. When I finally lowered the letter, the room snapped back into focus, and I found every face waiting, expecting something, maybe a breakdown, maybe a refusal, maybe a sign that I didn't deserve any of what I had just been given. Instead, I took a slow breath and set the letter on the table, my hands steadier now. This wasn't just about money, I said quietly, but my voice carried in the silence. This was about clearing my mother's name. Aunt Lillian startled as if stung. We never, she began, but I cut her off, my tone sharper than I expected from myself. You did. All of you did. You treated her memory like something you could dismantle and divide. Mark stood abruptly, pointing at me. You don't get to judge us. You weren't even here. I met his stare without flinching for the first time in my life. Because you made sure of that. A ripple of shock moved through the room, but I didn't look away. For the first time, the power in the room had shifted, and this time, it was mine. For a moment, no one spoke, as if the truth hanging in the air had taken on a life of its own, stretching from wall to wall, leaving no space for denial. And I felt something inside me settle, something firm, steady, like a foundation finally laid after years of standing on uneven ground. The lawyer cleared his throat again, not to interrupt, but to finalize everything. Per Mr. Ellis's instructions, he said, the transfer becomes effective immediately. She is now the legal owner of the reclaimed estate and all associated assets. The finality of his words landed like a quiet thunderclap. My cousins looked stunned, hollowed out by the reality that none of their scheming, whispering, or years of exclusion could change what had been decided long before they even walked into this room today. Aunt Lillian's eyes glistened at it with remorse, but with the bitterness of someone realizing they had lost a game they thought they controlled. This isn't over, she muttered, but the words sounded small, defeated. I stood up slowly, the weight of the moment settling across my shoulders in a way that didn't crush me, but lifted me. Because for the first time I was carrying something that belonged to Mimi's story, my mother's legacy, my uncle's faith in me. It is over, I said quietly, and the calm in my own voice surprised me. And it ended the moment you hid what was mine. Mark scoffed, but there was no fire behind it anymore. It was just noise. The lawyer handed me a final folder with the official documents, and when my fingers closed around it, I felt a warmth spread through my chest, a sense of closure I never thought I would have. I turned toward the door, ready to leave the mansion that had once felt like a place I wasn't allowed to enter. But before stepping out, I looked back at Thimth's family that had never truly been one. You didn't break me, I said, not loud, but strong enough that no one missed a word. You just taught me who I never want to become. Their faces flickered with emotions they couldn't hide: shame, anger, disbelief. None of it reached me now. I walked out of the mansion into the crisp afternoon air, the world suddenly feeling bigger, wider, mine again in a way it had never been. And as the door closed behind me, I whispered a soft thank you to my Uncle Ned for the inheritance, but for giving me back the truth, the courage, and the part of myself they tried so hard to erase.